Time to talk to Leith Van Onselen. We're fortunate to have him on the line. He's the Chief Economist at the MB Fund and MB Super. He joins us every week for what I think is my favourite segment. I know I said that before about Simon, but I just love the name of this segment, Leith, Treasury of Common Sense. Good morning, Leith.
Good morning, how are you?
I'm good, mate. I'm really well, thank you. Thanks for joining us. First up, let's hit it hard and early. A nation swimming in coal and natural gas should never experience energy insecurity, blackouts and soaring prices. Discuss.
Yeah, mate, look, getting onto this cost of living crisis, obviously, a major input into our cost of living is the cost of energy. So I'm talking about gas prices, more importantly, electricity prices. And the fact of the matter is Australians on the East Coast at least are getting hammered on both. And we really shouldn't be, because we are one of the world's biggest energy exporters. We are swimming in coal, we're swimming in natural gas. We've got, tons of uranium and all sorts of stuff. Basically everything the world needs, except for oil, Australia has in abundance. And yet, just a few weeks back, New South Wales narrowly avoided blackouts, which is insane. It wasn't even the peak of summer yet, and New South Wales almost hit blackouts. It was only because households and business owners, etc., cut back, air conditioning, all this sort of stuff. It's real, third world sort of stuff. And now, New South Wales and other parts of Australia have been warned to brace for blackouts this summer because the nation's electricity grid is becoming overloaded. And just this week, the East Coast Australian gas price, so that's per gigajoule, which is a unit of measurement, hit $17.50. Now that's, just to put that into perspective, that's about 6 times higher than historical prices going back, 15, 20 years ago. And to put that into perspective, we paid $17.50, I think, on Thursday, a gigajoule. Americans paid $2.50 US, or about $4 Australian, a gigajoule. Now, America are the world's biggest gas exporter. So we're number 2, America's number 1. And they're paying, roughly 1/4 of what Australians pay for gas.
Yeah.
And the reason why we pay so much for gas is because East Coast Australia is the only market in the world that exports gas. We export 3/4 of our gas on the East Coast, mostly to China, without any requirement to reserve gas for domestic use. So everywhere else in the world does it, including Western Australia, but we don't do it on the East Coast. And as I said, 3/4 of it is exported. Most of it goes to China. China receives more of our gas than it actually needs and actually re-exports it for profit. So they get it really cheaply on these long-term contracts. They get more gas than they need, and then they re-export it. And so does Japan, who also receives a lot of our gas. Now, the thing about it is Australia uses more gas converting it to liquid to export than households or businesses use in Australia.
Yeah.
So we've engineered this obscene domestic energy crisis, despite the fact that we're the world's second biggest exporter of gas. We export 3/4 of it on the East Coast. We export it to nations that get more of it than they need, and then they re-export it for profit. And the surge in gas prices is the key reason why Australian electricity prices have surged, because gas is the marginal price setter of electricity. Now, the ridiculous thing we've done in Australia is, apart from the fact that we privatised all our energy assets, decades ago,
yeah, of
course. We've also shut down all our reliable baseload generation, like coal.
It's unreliable. Sorry, Leith, it's unreliable according to Matt Keane and Chris Bowen.
Yeah, and the only reason why it's unreliable is because it's all been told that we've got to shut it down.
That's right.
Of course, when you know something's going to be shut down, you reduce investment in it because it's going to become a stranded asset. That's why it's become unreliable.
Leith, I just want your take on this, because if you say that what the government is saying at the moment should be questioned, you're hit with that you're a shock jock, that you're an idiot, that you don't know what you're talking about. But we've got the government on one hand saying exactly what you said there, right? Which is that the old system is bad, it's out of date, it's not working, it's unreliable. We need more renewable, more renewable, more renewable. That's all we keep hearing, right? And yet Australians are looking at their bill saying, why is my bill costing more than it's ever cost before? There's nothing sensationalist or ridiculous about that. That is just purely fact, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can't get around the fact that our costs have rocketed. And so we've got a cost of living crisis. We've engineered a high energy cost in this country, despite the fact that we're swimming in the stuff. And as a result, we're all paying for the neck. We've got no manufacturing industry anymore. It's all shutting down. We lost a major plastics manufacturer, last plastics manufacturer this year, Queenos, shut down because of high gas prices. Now, the thing about it is, this week, it was reported in, I think it was the AFR. So it hasn't come out officially, but this is what the rumblings are. The ACCC's reportedly delivered a report to the federal government declaring a shortage of gas for 2025.
Kidding me.
Now, remember, we export 3/4 of this stuff.
That's right.
We export it mostly to China, who gets more of it than they need, and then they resell it for profit. So here we are on the East Coast facing a domestic shortage. At the same time as we export 3/4 of it, we use more of it to convert it to liquid to then put on a ship to then send to China than we actually our households use or our businesses use. This is moronic stuff here.
It's completely nonsensical, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Can you imagine Saudi Arabia or Iraq or Iran, Iraq, whatever, importing oil because they've engineered a domestic shortage of oil because they're selling so much oil overseas?
Yeah.
This is the sort of stuff that we're dealing with in Australia. It's absolutely moronic. Now, the industry's been warned, reportedly, according to the AFR, that the federal government might invoke its Australian domestic gas security mechanism to limit exports. So what that is, the Turnbull government brought in a trigger, which basically a mechanism which allowed the federal government to force our exporters to supply the domestic market instead of exporting it. Pretty logical stuff. Now, again, Western Australia does this. All other exporting places in the world do it with their gas. So shock horror, our exporters who export 3/4 of stuff might actually have to save some of it for us. How terrible.
Yeah.
Now, and of course, the industry's saying, oh, no, this will anger our partners in Asia, our customers in Asia. This might make Australia, invoke sovereign risk and make us blah, blah, blah. The fact of the matter is, the federal government should have invoked this mechanism as soon as Russia invaded Ukraine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because as soon as that happened, gas prices globally rocketed, our electricity prices rocketed, and we generated an inflation shock, the cost of living crisis, a general crisis of costs in electricity and gas. And whereas our counterparts on the West Coast, which has domestic reservation, experience no increase in costs.
Well, Leith, it's fair. It's fair for the average Aussie. Sorry to interrupt you, mate, but it's fair for the average Aussie and again, the average Aussie might get, I guess, criticised for not understanding the ins and outs of it. But it is fair for the average Australian to be saying, "Who cares about our partners in Asia? Why am I paying 4 times more, as you said, than the US for the same product?"
Yeah, and especially when our customers in Asia are receiving more of our gas than they need, and they're reselling it for profit.
That's right.
So why aren't we keeping it for ourselves? And effectively, so we've got failed policy making everywhere. And at the same time as we're doing this, we're importing record volumes of people into the country who obviously need energy.
That's
so we've totally stuffed the supply side. We've crimped supply. We've shut down our reliable baseload power. We're replacing it with renewables, which quite frankly, I don't care about renewables if we've got the cheap gas as a backup.
I don't think anybody does. I don't think people are out there demonising them just because they're demonising them. It's just give us reliability in the system give us a system we can afford.
Yeah, that's right. We need a system where supply matches demand. And the problem with renewables is they provide too much supply in the middle of the day in summertime when the sun's shining.
Yep.
They don't provide nearly enough supply at night time because obviously you don't have solar. Wind is intermittent. It can work, it can't work, etc. So we have this massive imbalance. And the only way you can get around that imbalance is you've got to have backup power.
Yep.
And they call it peaking.
That's right.
The best form of peaking is gas because gas you can turn on and off really quick. And it's very, very, it's spontaneous. You can turn it on and off. You can't do that with coal because it takes ages to boil up, etc. So, gas is the perfect Robin to the renewables Batman, if you want to call it that. Problem is,
I like that.
The problem is we've made that backstop of gas incredibly expensive. We're paying 4 times what Americans pay. We've also made it incredibly unreliable, and we've engineered a shortage because we're exporting 3/4 on the East Coast. So if they fix the gas market and they give us cheap, reliable gas, which is what Western Australia's got and all these other places in the world, we would solve a lot of our energy problems.
I can see everybody out there nodding while you're speaking, Leith. We're gonna take a quick break if you don't mind, mate. If you can just hold on there. It's 23 minutes past 11 in Sydney, 23 minutes past 10 in Brisbane. A quick break and then back with more common sense with Leith Van Onselen. Leith, a question without notice. I thought this was a particularly good one that we had from a text messenger from Jeff, who just said he didn't know if he missed it, but he just wanted to know what your view on Peter Dutton walking away from plans to drastically cut immigration was.
Yeah, look, I think that's pretty poor form, to be quite honest with you. The fact of the matter is we've received 2 polls in the last week showing that Australians desperately want lower immigration. So we received polling by JWS Research, which showed that 3/4 of people believe Australia should reduce its immigration intake. And then we also got separate polling from Resolve Political Monitor, which showed that 64% want a reduction in the number of migrants. So this would be a clear, vote winner. But apart from the fact that it's a vote winner, it's actually the right thing to do. We've got a, chronic housing crisis in Australia.
Yep.
We've brought in way more people than we can, house, and that's patently obvious to anybody, as well as a whole bunch of other issues with infrastructure and quality of life and these sorts of things. So really, Peter Dutton should have steered into it, and he should be basically provide an alternative to the current government, because he's basically tried to backtrack and he won't commit to it, which has me worried that if he is elected, we're not going to really see much of a reduction in immigration. They're going to keep the Big Australia policy going. I'm sure immigration will come down, but it'll probably end up being like it was pre-COVID, when it was still far too high. And this has been going on for years. I mean, Australia's population has grown by 8.5 million people this century, which is just obscene.
It's enormous, isn't it? A couple of other really good messages. One from Sharon Leith, which is, how do we get out of this lease to export our gas? Is that something that the government can even do? Can they reverse that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, most of the contracts have got force majeure in them, which basically means that if there's a change in policy or there's some unforeseen, circumstance, you can cancel contracts. But look, the fact of the matter is, we should be doing everything we can to get out of them. Oh, yeah, I mean, look, the whole thing is we don't have to get rid of all of them, right? We export 3/4 of Australia's gas. If we exported 2/3 of it, we'd have more than enough domestically.
Yeah.
So we'd still be exporting the vast majority. They just need to cut back on some of the contracts. And, if our Asian partners get annoyed, I mean, China doesn't really have a right to get annoyed at us, given they cut a whole series of export contracts for us, and beef, wine, lobster, all these other areas. They don't seem to follow the rules, so why should we?
Yeah, absolutely. One last one before we get back on plan, mate. Greg's saying, I remember our power bills going up 15 years ago. The reason given was related to the work being done, which resulted in the transmission infrastructure being, quote unquote, gold-plated. What was all that about? Because now we're saying the infrastructure is no good and we need to fix it.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's part of the problem when you grow the population like a science experiment, isn't it? You always need more infrastructure.
Yep.
But also now we're now the idea is to completely rejig the grid so that it's not based on having a series of coal boilers or whatever in set locations. We're going to have basically power everywhere through these renewables. And we're going to have to build transmission wires and everything to all these disparate areas where you've got wind farms and all this other stuff. So yeah, look, it costs a lot of money, but the bigger problem is it's unreliable.
Yeah.
As I said, I've got no issues with renewables, but you need the backstop, and the backstop's got to be reliable and cheap. And the backstop is gas, but we've made that incredibly expensive. And the other reason why power bills went up, a decade or so ago, is because those Gladstone LNG terminals opened up, about 11, 12 years ago, I think it was, and just about a decade ago. And when that happened, as soon as that happened, our gas market got linked to the global market. And because we didn't have domestic reservation, and as a result, gas went up and then electricity went up.
You've got a pretty strong opinion on engineering and energy shortage in one of the most energy-rich countries in the world, which just further goes to the fact that this is just ridiculous that we're dealing with this.
Oh, it is absolutely obscene. And look, it's been done through 4 points of failure. We privatised all our energy assets decades ago, which has basically meant that we left profit maximising firms in charge, and they cut back investment and blah, blah, blah. They basically became private monopolies that try and gouge you. We then banned in obviously cheap, reliable generation through coal, etc. We then made the backstop to that gas incredibly expensive. And then finally, we've added to demand massively by growing our population like a science experiment. So we've increased demand massively while we've cut supply. And the result is higher costs. It's obscene in one of the most energy-rich nations on earth.
Yeah, David makes a really interesting point. The government got out of a diesel submarine contract worth billions. There's no doubt they can fix up the gas policy if they had the brains. That's from David.
Yeah, that's right. And look, the other obscene thing is, we're paying $17.50 a gigajoule this week for gas, but this is the off-peak season because we don't have all the Melburnians who are freezing in winter, using gas. Like, so this is the off-peak season. So we shouldn't be paying these obscene prices. But the reason why is because we've got the European winter, which has pushed up the global price, and then we're paying that global price.
Rob,
we shouldn't be paying that global price because we are swimming in the stuff.
Swimming in it, yeah.
Saudi Arabians, that's the Saudi Arabians paying $2 a litre for petrol, do you?
No, they pay about 20 or 30 cents probably a litre for fuel.
And mate, so do Americans.
Yeah.
Americans are the biggest exporters.
Yeah, absolutely. Rob just asked if it's feasible to create hydrogen with the excess solar that we've got during the day and then using that to run generators at night. But the issue with hydrogen, Leith, is that it's pretty energy dense to produce, and then storing and transporting it is a difficulty, isn't it?
Yeah, and hydrogen is just like a battery, basically. It's just a different form of a battery, right? Yep. So you can have a battery directly, which you fill up, with your excess solar and then use at night. Hydrogen is the same sort of principle, and it's just incredibly expensive to run. And a lot of the sort of pilot hydrogen programs have basically been shut down because they cost too much. The solution here, the number one solution, is make our gas cheap, and then build some more gas turbines. And one of the arguments that often gets used is, but the north-south pipeline for gas runs at capacity sometimes, which is true. In the middle of winter, it does when Victorians are using more gas for heating, etc. But most of the year it doesn't, and we could build a few storage tanks. That's what they do in America.
Yeah,
that's what they do in Europe. Mm-hmm. So it's the same principle. In wintertime, you fill up your gas barbecue. Right, and then in summer you use that gas bottle.
That's right.
We could do that with energy. All we need is a bit of planning and foresight. It's not rocket science.
It's crazy talk, though. Forward thinking. I mean, who would have thought about that? We're going to take another break, Leith. We'll come back and wrap things up with you after the break. It's 35 minutes past 11 in Sydney, 35 minutes past 10 in Queensland. You're back with Trent Nikolic, filling in for Luke Grant. Weekends on 2GB, 4BC and 2CC. Leith. And we're speaking to Leith Van Onselen, of course, if you've only just tuned in. Leith, I read something about this during the week and I just shook my head, but you've made the point that Australia uses more gas converting it into liquid for export than we actually use domestically, which is just ridiculous. Yeah,
look, it's slightly, once you add in electricity generation, so if you basically sum up household use, business use, and electricity generation, we use slightly more domestically than we use to export, to convert to liquid, but it's not by much. But the point is that we lose about, I think it's about 7% of our gas that the nation uses. We use merely to convert it to liquid to then transport it halfway across the world, so that China can burn our gas instead of us burning our own gas. And if you think about it from an environmental perspective, that's incredibly wasteful because we are literally using tons of energy to freeze it. Basically, we use giant freezers to turn this stuff into liquid and like liquid nitrogen type temperatures, purely to export it, when it'd be a lot better for the environment if we simply just used it at home and didn't go through that wasteful process. So all the net zero heroes out there who want Australia to cut its energy use and all this stuff, well, they should be arguing for us not to export a gas and just use it domestically, because it'd be a lot better for the environment and also be cheaper, and you wouldn't waste as much gas in that process. So look, we use more gas converted to liquid than households use or businesses use. But when you sum up household, business, electricity generation, it's about a couple % more than what we use to export, but it's not by much.
Yeah, it's not a lot there, is it? Leith, it's been an absolute privilege to speak to you again, mate. I love the common sense that we hear when you come on. The listeners do as well. One last one from Michael. State governments need to surrender power and minerals back to the federal government. If we move to nuclear, it needs to stay in public hands. Essential assets belong to the people. The state's selling off key public assets is a crime. That's from Michael. It's hard to argue with that line of thinking, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree, Michael. Like that is one of Australia's biggest mistakes has been this privatising everything, especially our natural monopolies, our essential assets like energy. And it's one of the reasons why we've gone from decades ago having the second cheapest electricity prices in the world to now having among the most expensive. And as a result, we've basically governments have trashed our living standards, they've pushed up the cost of living and inflation, they've driven manufacturing out of business. We've got one of the lowest manufacturing share in the world, in the advanced world now. And we've basically consigned ourselves to having a less diverse economy and lower living standards. It's just been an absolute own goal. And it's been policy failure upon policy failure over decades that have gotten us to this point. And it's just a disaster.
Leith Van Onselen, that is the way to describe it, an own goal. Thank you again for spending some time with us on your Saturday, mate. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem, Trent. Great speaking to you.
Since 19...